Hey, Guitar Heroes, this is Mel from How to Unleash Your Inner Guitar Hero. Available on School right now, skol.com/unleash your inner guitar hero, and how to play guitars with an s.com. And today we are talking about songs in the key of G. So all the songs that I just played for the intro are exactly that, songs in the key of G. And there's so many more. There's hundreds or thousands of songs in the key of G. And in fact, you can get a lot of mileage out of these four chords: G, E minor, C, and D. And right now in my classroom on School, there's a free beginner course that's going to show you how to get to the point where you know those chords and many more, including the ones that we're talking about today. And we're going to also, right now we're in a part of a challenge also in that School group about how to play in all 12 keys on the guitar. Right now we're on day 2. In fact, initially, I originally envisioned this as a 7-day challenge. I think I'm going to extend it to a 14-day challenge because it's going to be a pretty crazy challenge, even trying to cover all 12 keys in 14 days even, right? If I just extended a little bit more into another week, it's insane in 7 days, and I realized that pretty quickly. So anyway, we are in this challenge right now, learning all kinds of songs in various keys. Yesterday I did a key of C. Go check that video out. Today I'm doing key of G. And in fact, that very first riff is based obviously on a song called Brown Eyed Girl. And I did a video, I'll link it somewhere here in the video, about that song in the previous, in one of my previous videos, probably a few years ago, honestly. And so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that particular song, but I am going to spend some time on some of these other songs. In particular, I'm going to talk about what the key of G really means. So key of G simply means, for one thing, that it involves the notes in the key of G. So if I were to start out with a scale in the key of G, it would literally be the G major scale. And so I would start on the lowest 3rd fret of the E string here, which is often the lowest note in your G chord. However you want to play that G chord, there's lots of ways to do that. But we're going to start on that 3rd fret on the low E string and go through the notes in the key of G. So that's G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and G. That's just one octave. Now, if I want to do the higher octave, I would start on that G string, the one that I just ended on, and just keep going up the scale. G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, and then G. Okay. Now, if you're wondering why there's an F sharp, I actually have a 5-day challenge that I've done before, or a workshop on basically just beginner guitar, and it goes through all the chords and all the theory that you need to know to be able to understand why there's those notes like F sharp in the key of G and so forth. And there will be, I'm going to revisit that. I'm going to redo that workshop that I did probably about a year ago. And it's for a nominal fee. So that'll also be in my group on School, skol.com/unleash your inner guitar hero. But let me just say right now real quick, basically what it comes down to is that C scale that we did yesterday, go watch that video, had these notes C, D, E, F, G, A, B, and C. And between each of these notes, there's an interval. So if I go from a C to a D, by the way, I could go up the neck. So if I go C to D this way, that's a whole step. And from E to F is another whole step. But the next note in the scale is an F. So that puts a half step between E and F. And then between F and G is a whole step. Between G and A is a whole step. And between A and B is a whole step. And there's one more half step between B and C. Now you find that on the guitar, even in the first position, because if you start to learn the notes, you realize that there's an E string and then a 1st fret F note. And then there's an octave to that, E to F. And then another octave to that, E and F. Remembering that octave is basically every 8 notes, the same note is repeated, higher or lower than the note that you previously played. So E, those are all E's. Okay, those those are all E's in various places on the guitar. And there's lots of other places that we can play those similar E's. But at least want to know the open ones and maybe the 2nd fret to start. And then once you get a little bit more advanced, it's actually helpful to know the 7th fret. That'll come in handy later on down the road. But that's the key of C. And it has, like I said, the half steps between E and F, and then B and C. E and F, B and C. B and C here also, E and F, right? E, F, B, C. Okay, so forth and so on. So find those, learn to find those. And again, there'll be resources in my group on school, skool.com/unleash your inner guitar hero for some of these things that we're talking about today. But in the key of G, we're starting on G here. And again, I have a whole step between G and A, and then between A and B, like I had in the C major scale. And then I have the B and C half step that I had previously. Then I have a whole step, but I need one more whole step. And now it goes from E to, instead of F, it's going to go to F sharp. And then my last half step is between F sharp and G. Now you can also easily see this on the G string. From G to A as a whole, A to B as a whole, B to C as a half, C to D as a whole, D to E as a whole, E to F sharp as a whole, and then F sharp to G is a half. Now, if I changed those intervals and went back to the previous notes that I had, instead of F sharp, I played F, that gives me a slightly different scale that's actually a mode of G major, called Mixolydian. That's a topic of another video, basically. But just know that when you play that G major scale, you hear that resolution there from the half step to the, in this case, F sharp to G, and that's what gives it that distinctive major scale sound, which is then going to tell us what notes are going to be in all the chords thereafter. So obviously we have the G chord, and the next note in the key is A, so that next chord is going to be an A minor. Now, if you've already watched the video about C major, if you haven't already, go check it out. But if you've watched it, you'll notice that the first chord was always major, second chord is minor, in this case, A minor. The next chord in this key is B minor. The next chord in this key is C, and the next chord in this key is D. So right there, you're going to see that though the first, fourth, and fifth chords in any major key are always going to be major. Now the fifth chord can also be a dominant chord, in this case a dominant seventh, or in this very specifically a D7, which we may talk about that a little bit today, but we won't go in too much depth. But just know that these are basically the first 6 chords, or first 5 or 6 chords in the key of G. G, A minor, B minor, C, D, and then E minor is the 6th chord. The last one is this unique chord called F sharp diminished, and the basic triad looks like that. Now, when you get into sevenths, some things present themselves a little bit more interestingly. And again, I don't want to get into that right now in this video. That, again, is a topic for another conversation or another video, really. But just understanding that those are the basic chords in the key of G. And so if I were to do, like before, previously, in the beginning of the video, I was doing like this riff, which like I said, that was Brown Eyed Girl, which mostly that's G, C, G, and D, which again, that's that 1, 4, 1, 5. And all kinds of variations on that, right? Very common. You can get it. You can actually learn a lot of songs just by knowing those 3 chords. Once you add the E minor, which actually comes a little later into the song, you get what's called a 1, 6, 4, 5. Very common chord progression. Not only in this key, but in other keys as well. Yesterday we had talked about the key of C, and specifically we talked about the song Let It Be briefly, and that one has a 1, 6, 4, 5 in the key of C. Well, this is, so remember this 1, 6, 4, 5. That's going to be handy down the road later on in this challenge when I start to show you how to use the capo and how to go up the neck and change key that you're currently in. So for right now, another chord that we can talk about that's often in the key of G is A minor. So one of the songs that I played initially in that intro video was this, which is Runaround by Blues Traveler. If you don't know it, go look it up. And so it's a G to a C to an A minor to a D. We would call that a 1, 4, 2, 5. Besides the 1, 4, 5, the 1, 2, 5 is another very common chord progression that's often used in all styles of music, especially jazz. It's very common in jazz and in styles also like bossa nova and Latin jazz. You know, even artists like Santana uses it. So it's a very common thing. But this particular chord progression uses the 1, 4, 2, 5. Now, if I were to go up that scale continually, so we talked about G and then A minor, the next chord in this key would be a B minor. Now, in the previous video, we talked briefly about the B diminished. I didn't get too heavy into it. But because in the key of C, there's the F note. And right there, there's this thing called the tritone. And the tritone creates these things called diminished chords. But in the G major key, this is the third chord in that key, and it's going to have F sharp, right? And that F sharp makes this B a B minor chord, or even B minor 7, if I take the pinky off. And this is often a tricky chord for a lot of people. If you're still learning bar chords, I have something, again, in my classroom on school, skool.com/unleash your inner guitar hero. I have something called the fretboard, actually I call it the F chord manifesto, which is basically a PDF that I created showing you various ways to conquer bar chords once and for all. Now, it's based on the idea that F as being the most difficult bar chord, which often is considered to be that. But once you can get the basics of how to get that chord, then you can get any bar chord, including, in this case, B minor. One of the many songs that contains the B minor is the song Against the Wind by Bob Seger. And that goes like something like this. You've got a G, B minor, C, back to G, D, C. So let's say 1, 6, 4, 1, 5, 4. Now the reason those numbers are important, I learned them as Roman numerals. I talked a little bit about that in the previous video that I did based on the key of C. You know, in college we talked about it in terms of Roman numeral analysis, which is really goes back to classical music theory, but we also use it in jazz and other styles of music as well. And essentially it puts a number, a Roman numeral, under each chord created in a given key. In this case, the G major, the key of G major, G being 1, A minor being 2, B minor being 3, C being 4, D being 5, and E minor being 6. And I'm going to leave the diminished chord alone for right now. But there's also a system called the Nashville system. Like I said, we talk about that in my group on school. And that's instead of using the Roman numerals, you're using Arabic numbers, which a lot of people don't know them as Arabic numbers, but essentially those are the numbers that you learn in school. Just standard 1, 2, 3, and so forth. And so to some people, that's an easier way to represent the notes or the chords in this scale because they can understand that easier than Roman numerals. And nowadays, not a lot of people know Roman numerals anymore. It's not used very often except for old clocks and things like that. So some people aren't as familiar with it. Regardless, it's still a useful numbering system because if I'm in the key of G and for some reason I want to change it to a different key for a vocalist or someone else in the band that wants to do it in a different key, or it was recorded in a different key, then I can use the capo, I can use bar chords and other things like that to move it up and down the neck in various ways. Or I can even detune the guitar to play it in a lower key that way as well. But you can keep the general idea of the chord progression intact by remembering the numbers that we just talked about. And you can, at that point, virtually play in any key, which is what this challenge is all about. Now, another song that's very common is the song Knockin' on Heaven's Door, originally written by Bob Dylan, but it's been covered by all kinds of people, including Eric Clapton and Guns N' Roses and so forth. And that's basically a G, D, to A minor, G, D to C. So in terms of numbers, we would call this a 1, 5, 2, a 1, 5, 4. And for a little melodic color, I'm moving some of the notes around. And these give you some interesting variations on these chords, like an A sus4, A minor, A sus2. Similar with the C, C add 9, C, C major 7, C. You'll also find these songs in, or these chords in songs like Dust in the Wind, which I think I've done a video on that one as well. So anyway, these are great chords to get to know. And if I didn't tell you that already, this is I did tell you 1, 5, 2, and a 1, 5, 4. Okay. And there's lots of songs that use these chords in this key. Now, I've talked about the G major scale in that open position. I often also will tell people about the pentatonic scale. Now, yesterday I didn't talk as much about the pentatonic scale because I actually have a video about that as well, especially in C major. That's on my, I'll try to put a link to it, but you can also search for it on my YouTube channel, where I show you how to play a riff. I think it's the Migro riff in C major up and down the neck using the 5 different boxed patterns from the caged method, which is sort of what I'm using right now in this method that I'm using to go through the different keys, the different songs in different keys, but in a different way. I'm actually using the circle of fifth, which is related but a little different. But if you have some of those things understood and you're starting to learn them, I always start my students with the open position first. It's one of the unique things that I think I do that's different than anybody else. And you know, if you get the G major scale, or if you want a simpler version of that scale, you can do the pentatonic scale, which is just the notes G, A, B, D, E, and then starts back over a G. A, B, D, E, G, which you'll also know that as E minor pentatonic, same notes, because E minor and G major are basically the same key, the same notes, especially in the pentatonic. But you also, you know, considering that G is the 1 chord and E minor is the 6th chord, they're related to each other. And if I only move these 2 fingers for a 4-finger G and then a 4-finger E minor 7, you'll see they're almost the same thing. Really, they are, except with the exception of one note that's different. The G becomes an E, and this D often becomes an E. But either way, it's really you're just adding an E note for an E minor 7. It still contains the notes E, G, B, and the 7 is the D, which the G chord is G, B, D. It's almost the same exact thing. And so you can use that both in your scales and in learning songs. And we'll talk more about this later in the challenge. We'll talk about the difference between a major key and a minor key, and how minor keys are derived from the major keys. They're very useful, but there's a few changes that we make to them to make them, to really solidify the fact that they're now in a minor key. It's a little different, but we'll get into that later. And I'll say once you get this basic pentatonic scale down, you can also do songs like, right? Or so they'll see Home Alabama by Leonard Skinner, and then I just did Wish You Were Here by Pink Floyd. They're both using virtually the same chords and the same notes, just in a different order. And that G major scale has basically it has 2 more notes in it than the pentatonic. So the pentatonic was G, A, B, D, E, G. The diatonic just adds the C, G, A, B, C, which is the 4th, D, E, and then F sharp, which is the 7th. and we'll get into those notes later. Those are also very important notes to understand. But that's basically what you're doing, is you're just, from a pentatonic to diatonic, you're just adding 2 notes in. The 4th and the 7th. And what those do actually is they bring back the half steps between the B and the C in this case, and the F sharp and G, which we explained earlier in the video. And you can even see that across the G string, right? Which is part of actually that Sweet Home Alabama riff. Right? Same notes, it's the G major scale going up the string about halfway. G, A, B, C, half step, D, E, F sharp, half step to G. Okay? And so once you get some of those fundamentals down and you've practiced them and you've learned them pretty well, and you can play everything in the open position, then I would start going up the neck a little bit. And we'll be talking as we go more about this, especially as it relates to the cage method, which I get more into depth about in my group on school, in particular in the intermediate workshop that I also do in my group on school. But the next scale to be learned in this first, 4 or 5 frets would be starting here based on the E shape or E form. But I would start the G on the 2nd finger on the 3rd fret, and the pentatonic would just be this. G, A, B, D, E, G, A, B, D, E, G, right? A lot of people know that little box, even from, again, it's in Wish You Were Here and things like that. And in Jimi Hendrix tunes like Hey Joe, I've talked about that in the Hey Joe video. But anyway, this is a little box. This sort of is an extension of the main open box. But really, it's this next pattern right here. Then to make it diatonic, again, you're just adding the 4th and the 7th, C into F sharp in this case. So G, A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. A, B, C, D, E, F sharp, G. And then you have a fully diatonic scale in G. And the next position. And that's actually going to help you as we go through the challenge, because I'm going to start to show you how you can take this little figure and move it up to get in new keys. We'll get into that next time. So so for this lesson today, I just really want you to learn a song in the key of G, start practicing the pentatonic and diatonic scales in the key of G, and then go from there. Don't forget to check out day 1, which was all about the key of C and the C major scale and some songs in that key. And tomorrow we're doing the key of D, so stay tuned for that. And until next time, keep jamming. And this is Mel from How to Play Guitars and Unleash Your Inner Guitar Hero, available on school right now, skool.com. Unleash Your Inner Guitar Hero, and I'll see you there.